From Florida's Space Coast, this is Your Career.
Welcome to Your Career. I'm Debbie Featherston, your host. With me is Reggie Crane, president of Next Level Coaching. Thank you, Reggie, for joining me. And Curtis Curry, president of Quality Learning International. Thank you, Curtis, for coming. And Karl Lieb, president of the Character Corporation. Gentlemen, we've been together, and now this is our third session, and I really am delighted that you have been able to come back and really spend some time helping us explore organizational communication and conflict. Critical to organizations today. Tell me a little bit about it from your perspective and the consulting that you do. Reggie, do you mind if I start with you?
Fine. Every organization, right, and I think, like what Covey said, is aligned to get the results that it produces. And so from the standpoint of looking at that, having clarity about exactly what the organization is designed to produce, whether it's a service or a product, and then making sure that everybody in the organization understands what role they play in that process. When that's in place, you know, it really sets a dynamic environment up, in my opinion, that allows people to do their best work because they're not hindered, they're not hamstrung. But in the absence of having clarity about, you know, what the organization is there to do, in the absence of departments under the organization understanding how they play a role in allowing the organization to produce what they produce, and therefore leading to the people not having clarity about what they need to do to help the organization to be successful, it leaves people to their own devices. And I think in that situation, people are actually trying to do the best that they can in those situations, but the lack of clarity and guidance, I think it leads to a lot of conflict. And so I think when we talk about organizational communication and conflict, I think the more you have enhanced and effective organizational communication, it leads to minimize conflict. Now I say minimize because I'm not a believer that all conflict is bad.
Right.
I believe it's how you manage it that makes it, you know, good or bad. So I think the more we communicate, the more we're able to minimize the negative conflict and kind of improve on the positive conflict to kind of move forward.
Excellent. Karl, this is an area of expertise for you.
It keeps us employed. and I don't mean that joking, because so many organizations have a large dysfunction when it comes to how they manage conflict. From the one side where just do what I tell you to do because I told you to do it, to the other side of, well, sure, whatever you want, I want to avoid it. And when we go in there, part of our jobs is to sit there and say, what's healthy here for this organization? And that's going to be different. Different organizations have a different level within this continuum that we refer to on occasion. But when you're talking about conflict, it is, in most cases, that lack of communication. That people just don't understand each other to the level that they should understand each other. And we can get to that part of the conversation and get all that emotion just kind of relaxed, and we have a chance to succeed. That makes the organization more effective, more efficient, more productive, as opposed to spending way too much of their time thinking about how to deal with that evil person sitting next to me.
What do you think is really at the root of the challenge that organizations have with effective communication?
I think one of the things is just the fluidity, right, of leadership. And that's a dynamic that, I don't know if you're ever going to get a handle on, because people have aspirations to kind of move up and move in different places. But I think when you have that kind of fluidity, and then you couple that with the fact that you really don't have a solid, clear picture of what the organization is all about, so it kind of minimizes some of that dynamic that comes along with the leadership fluidity. I think it contributes to a lot of conflict that happens in organizations to a certain degree.
And a lot of times, no one teaches people how to do it. I don't know about you. Were you ever taught how to communicate?
No, I think we just had a lot of models, right?
Of all the things that we do, but the vast majority of people, they're not taught how to communicate.
Right. Right, we just had role models, so it depends on the environment they grew up, the parents, the others, significant others.
All those contribute to what they think is the appropriate way to go.
Right.
Those models also influence how we handle conflict. And one of the things that I'll almost always do when I start a conflict workshop is to ask for reactions. When I say the word conflict, what do you think of? And I don't usually get, at least not out of the gate, productive problem solving, anxiety, avoidance. The majority of the words that come out are very, very negative. So obviously, individuals and organizations struggle with managing conflict productively, and we know it costs organizations billions of dollars. The average employee spends 3 hours a week on conflict. The average manager, I've seen studies that vary between 30 and 40% dealing with conflict in an organization. So it's
pretty substantial.
Substantial, and it's a cost to organizations who don't know how to manage conflict productively in terms of turnover, in terms of absenteeism, all kinds of negative consequences for not having people who can address conflict effectively.
And then when you're talking the bottom line of an organization, if you don't manage conflict well, the commitment level of the employee, that goes in the tank. We've talked about morale. Well, think about the word commitment.
EQ can play a role in this as well, right, in terms of assertiveness. Because I think for the most part, when we hear the word assertive, we think aggressive, right? And so I think when there's conflict, I think people do get to a point where they get aggressive because they're in this position, I gotta win, you gotta win. But if we teach assertiveness is not about aggressive, it's about, hey, I've got a point here, right? And it's important that you hear my point and you say it professionally, respectfully, and you say it in a way that, you would want somebody to talk to you, and you just put it out there. It doesn't mean you put it out there and you walk away. You may have to stay in that space for a while, right? But you stay in the space in a constructive way so that what you're trying to get across is gotten across. I think there's this, again, it goes back to communication. How do we communicate? How do we show up in that space when we find ourselves in disagreement with somebody else? And how self-aware are we that we're feeling whatever we're feeling in that moment, whether it's, I got to win, whether it's that maybe this person's always won over me, maybe I just feel as though I got to respond because if I don't, I look like I'm weak, whatever that is, having some self-awareness about why you're feeling that way in that moment allows you to put yourself in a situation where you can better manage that as well.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sitting here listening to what you're saying, Reg, and the one thing that strikes me is that when there's a need, right, when we recognize there's a need for a behavior shift, what are the things that they do? They're going to bring you in as consultants. What are some of the things that you're doing? I know, Curtis, you had mentioned that you use some cool assessments. That's always a great place whenever we can get that and give them feedback, whether it's a 360. What are some of the other things that you do? Build on that. Tell me more.
Yeah, one of the things that I do a lot of simple things before I get to behind the curtain stuff, right? And I kind of just ask them, okay, so what's happening with you, right? If it's a challenge, describe to me where you are right now in terms of what you're feeling and what's going on. And what does that look like, right? And then I want you to paint a picture in your head of where you want to be, to show up differently somehow. What does that picture look like? How are you different? What behaviors are you exhibiting then that you're not exhibiting now? And then there's a gap. And so now once the gap comes out, then we start talking about, okay, so what are the steps that you need to take, right, to get from point A to point B?
Right.
And once they start having that kind of conversation where they start developing their own plan, now I know how to go behind the curtain, right, and pull some things out to kind of help them along the way.
Good point.
One of the things that I'll do, it's silly and it takes 2 minutes, but I can use it all day long. And I'll say, we all know tic-tac-toe. And they all say, yeah, I know the game tic-tac-toe. I want you to add an extra horizontal and vertical line. And then I say, partner up. I want you to win as much as you can, 4 in a row. Well, they think now the dynamics have changed because there's 2 more lines. And they start playing. And they go around the room, and I start seeing who won, who lost, who won, who lost. Ultimately, the bottom line is, what were the rules? Win as much as you can. I didn't say beat the other person. And they don't, it's that aha moment where it's like, oh my gosh, we took this childhood game, and that's how ingrained we are on conflict and winning and beating the other person. and it's just ingrained in us in almost a cultural sense. And that's when I can really start to have teaching moments. They start to see that it's ingrained without their thought process. Now maybe we can open the door.
Just to piggyback on that, I saw a Covey video, right, where he did a similar thing. He had these two guys and got them in the arm wrestling position, right? And he says, okay, I want you to win as much as you can. And so they were locked, right? And so finally one of them just said, let his hand go down. And the other one held him down. And then he said, well, if you let me pin you. And then the guy was so hesitant to do it, but he finally said, okay, yeah, and then he did it. And you could just tell that there was something happening, because eventually they went from locking each other down to the fact that now they were going back and forth and they were winning like that. So it really changing the script, the mindset, the perception, and allowing people to kind of look at things as they are, as opposed to how they think it is, which is another element of EQ, reality testing. Looking at things as it really is, as opposed to looking at it as you want it to be or as you think it might be. I mean, just really kind of zeroing in and being really, really clear.
Yeah.
That goes back to courage. You have to be self-aware.
Yeah.
That's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of the things I do, just to piggyback on what Reggie said earlier, is using the model that I'd mentioned before, the conflict dynamics profile. There are actually some very good books that I would recommend to our audience out there on conflict management by some colleagues, Tim Flanagan and Craig Runday.
Okay.
The conflict competent leader, the conflict competent team. They've written a series of books, and they're published by the Center for Creative Leadership. They're very good books. And you need to be able to paint a clear picture of what those productive skills, what those constructive behaviors are, and what those destructive behaviors are, and give people an opportunity to understand those in small groups. What is that picture of constructive conflict that we want to move toward? And then practice around some critical incidents, some dialogue skills, and that in small groups as well.
Yeah.
So that can help people grow those skills to
Very
manage
powerful.
conflict more productively.
Poor communication equals conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, really, when you say it's a no-brainer, it really is. Those two are so related.
Yeah.
And if I can work on your communication with others, more than likely what I will see is less conflict. And it's egocentric. There's so many different things that go into this. But if they really want to be a better leader and be a better manager, be a better coworker, they want to get better. Because everything we teach them is a life thing. This teaches you how to communicate and mitigate all that conflict that you're finding you're in the middle of. And most people will sit there and say, no, I don't want to fight. I don't want to be in conflict with people. But they may not take those steps to change it.
The opposite results as well. Conflict leads to very poor communication, especially relationship conflict. Reg started us off talking about the different kinds of conflict, and the academics usually look at task conflict and relationship conflict, and moderate amount of task conflict is very important. You can't have creativity and change and innovation without some conflict.
Right.
But it's when it becomes personal and escalates that it becomes a big problem. And if you did the anatomy of a conflict, what happens as that conflict begins to escalate? Breathing, your breathing becomes more labored and more shallow.
Blood pressure.
That's right. Your heart starts beating faster. Your palms start sweating.
Sure.
Things happen in your brain as well. As you start taking in the messages, they're not going up to the prefrontal cortex. They're heading straight to the amygdala. And so once we hit that emotional state, it's really physiologically impossible to be rational. So conflict leads to the quality diminishes precipitously of communication.
When you're coming up in the ranks and you're moving up as a manager, one of the things that you evaluated on is how your ability to make decisions, right? And sometimes that means making a decision regardless of whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, and standing in that space and standing firm, being assertive, showing that you got the stuff to lead and to make things happen. well, as you grow and you develop and you reward it by behaving in that fashion, sometimes you get to a point where now you're in a leadership role and you don't realize in your head that, I'm a really assertive person. And because of my assertiveness, maybe I'm closing off, some opportunities to get feedback from people who could be of value to me because I'm just not open to that cooperative piece, right? So, sometimes leaders have to really kind of open themselves up to a level of vulnerability and scrutiny. I think
that's the key, vulnerability.
Yeah, and they have to be willing to go there. And I think a lot of them are, willing to go there, but I think they got to be willing to go there to put themselves in a position where they can get real clarity about here are my strengths. And here are these things that are precluding my strengths from really kind of showing up in this space. So now, what am I willing to do about those things that might not allow me to be as effective as I could or should be right now?
I think that's huge, where leaders are open to being vulnerable. And when others observe that they're being vulnerable, they're really being genuine here, they're going to be more open.
Absolutely.
I think that's, again, goes back to that role model that they're playing, and what a shift we can see. So any final words around, if things that we can do or advice that we could give maybe organizations that would really help to enhance their effectiveness around communication, organizational communication, around better dealing with conflict, since we see a strong correlation between the two?
When Curtis said, when the inverse was a true, conflict and communication conflict, chicken and the egg, that's one of the things that you as an organization, those people that are driving that organization, they need to step back and say, what is my organization really about in terms of these topics? Do we have a good communicating organization? And that doesn't mean the company newsletter. It doesn't mean whether or not we have town hall meetings. It's the day-to-day tone of the voice, the day-to-day civility that you see that's going to allow the organization to function at a professional, civil workplace. And that's what's going to drive it. Take an honest, genuine look and see what's really going on. Very few people look at the tone of voice in their workplace, and that tone of voice is huge.
That's a good point.
I think at the organizational level, it's very important also to not take it for granted. Communication is very difficult, and a lot of times a leader will think, well, I sent a memo, or I sent an email. No, I'm sorry, if you're dealing with organizational change or important issues, that's not going to be enough. So I think feedback is also important, and then I think training can help. I know that Karl, for example, his doctoral work is on listening. So he's done a lot of research around effective listening, and most of us don't go to classes to learn how to listen more effectively, even though listening is an important part of our jobs.
Well, it's a crucial part of the equation, and we haven't even touched that. We'll have to.
That's a whole other episode.
That is a whole other edition.
Yeah, and just to piggyback, I think that every organization should take the opportunity to do some kind of an assessment that allows everybody in the organization to have some level of awareness about how they show up and an appreciation for the fact that other folks could show up differently, right?
Right.
That's not a bad thing, regardless of what it is. I'm not here to pitch one over the other, but somebody should sit down that organization from a leadership standpoint and make sure that we engage in something organizationally that becomes a language, right, that we can use when we find ourselves in these situations where we have to communicate where conflict could be a major issue. Yeah.
And when you do a half-day workshop on something like that, it's powerful. It just is.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, it has been a pleasure to have you, and I can't believe how quickly 30 minutes goes. But this has been a great program, gives a lot of great thought for organizations or people that are thinking about maybe organizational consulting or just wanting to specialize in this area of communication, dealing with conflict. And now, Matt Milton to discuss video and TV production. Matt Milton, thank you for coming from behind the scenes of the crew here at Your Career to join me and share with our viewers a little bit more about the different facets of opportunities within television production, if you will. And now, Matt, you have done lighting and cameras, you've done directing, audio. So what really inspired you to choose this a career?
Something about telling a story through video or being able to share something through video is something that I've always been doing ever since high school or as a child. And so I just really enjoy doing that. And I want to try and do that for the rest of my life and also making a living at it too.
And what are some of the kinds of projects that you've really enjoyed? Now, you're a graduate of Eastern Florida State College here in Florida. And so tell me a little bit more about...
I graduated here with an AS degree in digital media, television production, also with 4 certificates in video production, video editing, broadcast production, things like that. But some of the things I've really enjoyed doing through the program were a lot of different events. We did live events. We would do also things that were just recorded just like we were trying to make a box office film, short films, things like that. Commercials, music videos. I love getting a band into a studio and having 4 or 5 cameras around to just shoot them jamming, and maybe even be able to broadcast that live over the internet.
And there's, I'm sure that there's different kinds of challenges that come with that, but also some fun because, that stimulates your creative side where you have a vision of what you want that to look like as well as what that needs to sound like.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the great things about lighting is that you can create any kind of atmosphere through lighting, throwing up a couple of different colors and matching those colors with a band that comes in and, they're all dressed up in costumes and stuff to match up different atmospheres to that. That's tons of fun. Yeah.
Now, you've volunteered a lot in your early years especially.
I have over 1,000 hours of volunteer service within the program.
Wow. And what were some of those kinds of projects that you really enjoyed most? Because to me, this is part of that skill building, and it's part of what gives you that foundation and the breadth and depth of experience that you bring to us.
Well, at the college, I created a club, a student government organization club, and we started doing events, for example, like a 24-hour film challenge.
Okay.
We would take 24 hours for all the students in the class, 24 hours with 3 things. You had a line, a prop, and a character. You had 24 hours to go shoot, edit, and upload this video. So there was no, we've had a month long to figure this out and think about this and how is this going to go and where we're going to do this and where we're going to shoot. No, let's go out there, get an idea, shoot it, put it together, and post it up, and let's see what we can
Content,
do.
everything.
Yeah, let's see what comes out of it. Some people made amazing short videos, and you would have no idea that it was for this purpose, because they would be able to stand alone on themselves. There were other ones that, they would be focused around that prop, that character, and that line. So you also got to see what different students would come out with. If you gave them 3 things, how would they interpret those 3 things, and how they interpret that on video. So it was a great skill building for the club, for the people in the club, and it was also a great content producer. If somebody said, hey, I want to try and do this in this video, I'm really good at editing and everything, so I can help you do this so that we can actually get it done this time.
Okay, so some good teaming.
And the team building, the team building is just extraordinary from that, too.
Well, it sounds like it's team building, but within the team, you are educating and continuing to help mentor and coach each other.
That was the big point of the club, was that the reason why we created the club was to showcase the student work and the student talent that was happening. And that student work was being created because of the collective efforts of everybody.
Okay.
We all would get together and we'd say, hey, what are you doing this weekend? Is there, can we try and do this? Or, hey, I have an idea for a script. Can we go over it? Can we talk about it? And is it something that we really can shoot? Okay, well, let's go do it, And there have been a lot of short films that I've made throughout just that method itself.
That's great. We have about 1 minute left, and if what would you say to anyone that aspires to move along a similar path that you have? What would you suggest that they do to boost that resume?
Create content. keep creating content, and the more that you keep creating content, the more experience you build from that. And you know, it may not be the best work that you've ever done, but now you're learning how not to do that. Or you're learning, hey, I really like this idea, I really like how this was done. I want to try and replicate that. You know, and that was a big point of the club and bringing all those people together for the club to be able to have that. So then now all of a sudden it's not just a bunch of students that are trying to learn how to do all this. Now, if you look at the club, it's a bunch of people that are literally in the industry doing all of this, and they're doing all this because of the experience that they had in the beginning.
Matt, thank you very much. This is very informative and helpful, and I know the viewers will greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
On behalf of my guest and everyone here on the set of Your Career, thank you for watching, and remember, be career happy.
More information about this program is available online at millermediagroup.org.